I have attended Duke Colloquium Day many times, and those are three of the most powerful presentations that I've had the privilege to watch. Those really great, and we're now going to open the floor to questions. This is a civic and civil environment here, so if you are tempted to run an anti-CRT rant, please ratchet that back and just engage in open intellectual. Okay, so if you all would like to step up here when a question is asked to you, you can do that. It might make it easier for people to hear. We'll grab a chair. So please, question. You've answered all the questions. Yes, please go ahead.
Is there any plan in concrete at this present time to carry this forward?
Yeah, so we are continuing this research through this semester, through this summer, into next semester. And in December of this year, we will be publishing a 100+ page report with all of our research, all of our findings. And from there, I would love to continue this research. I'm graduating, so as an alumni or independently. But it is continuing, the SMJP's work is continuing at least until December of this year when we publish our report. Yes.
Has there been any concrete presentation from the powers that be around here, around town, around this county, around this state to support and bring forward a program like you're talking about?
So there are a lot of other colleges in Missouri that are doing this work. Christian and I presented at the Missouri Conference on History with a couple students from WashU that have institutional support from their administration, and they do have a school-led group, a school-backed group that is doing this research. And there are a few other colleges in Missouri that are doing so. I mean, at Jewell, we have the SMJP and the RRC. I know of a couple groups in Liberty and Clay County that are doing similar research. I know Michelle Cook has worked a lot on cemeteries and finding the unmarked graves of enslaved people. So there are a lot of different aspects to this research. Yes, I will let Christian speak on that.
As far as the narrative sets currently, the extent of what we know surrounding Ellen's involvement in the Jewell family extends within the will of Dr. William Jewell, where she was taken under the into this as a servant to Dr. Jewell's daughter until the 21st birthday of her son, Dr. William Boyle Jewell, sorry. But as far as her fate or whether she did have any children up to that point is inconclusive at the moment.
What do you think the relationship is going to look like in the future? Speak up. What do you think the relationship going forward is going to look like between the SMJP and the RRC? Do you think it's going to get better or stay the same?
And if you'd like the students to speak up, say please. Don't order anyone around. As far as the relationship is concerned, at the current moment, there is no concerted effort to rectify the two groups, to see some sort of collaboration between them. I think that conversation is a great resource for that, and it was part of why in my background going into this discussion that I hope to reach out to Dr. Gardner for comments. I hope that further conversations can be had moving forward to collaborate between those two groups. But at the current moment, there is nothing being done, nothing concrete towards that collaboration.
I came up from a greater Kansas City community. As an educator myself, I'm curious to know, I'd like to hear from each of the students, what surprised you most about this project?
For each one of us, to this moment of time, what has been the most surprising aspect of our research up until this point was the question?
Or the outcome of the research?
The outcome of our research. I would say for me personally, the majority of my research, as Hayley deliberated during her segment, has been focused on the legacy of Dr. William Jewell in particular. What came surprising most to me was that, given the fact that there have been at least three official histories given for the college up to this point that the school links to on their personal website for people who are interested in learning more about the history of William Jewell. The information provided regarding Dr. William Jewell is extremely brief in two of them, and even for the one that goes into this information more in depth, there's still little to no mention on his relation to slavery, other than the fact that this narrative created that he was a good slaveholder, that he, in another document, refers to him as having interest in people as a excuse for the relationship he had with his slaves. So given that he's such a prominent member, the namesake of the college, I was surprised that those histories are not more fleshed out than they are.
I have a microphone now, so we can pass this around.
Before you start, I was going to go ahead and answer hers. So for me, I did a lot of my research on Alexander Donovan. And the most surprising thing for me after this research has come out is the lack of change on campus. We still have a lot of things that are named after Donovan and bear his name. I was pleasantly surprised that Student Senate voted to change the name of the Colonel Alexander Donovan Award. And I was very excited about that. But I do think that now that we know more about his history, we need to do better. And we need to make those lasting changes to promote the value that reflect the values that the school should be promoting.
For me, the most surprising thing is, in essence, kind of just the gathering here today. I've always been very interested in sort of the power of organizational and movements and sort of what mobilization looks like on a political, historical, social level. My communications capstone research was into sort of the March on Washington and the rhetoric used between Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King. So sort of looking at the potential for grassroots interest in a project like this is phenomenal. You all are the grassroots, and that's a really cool thing to see, because coming into college, you're forming your conception of community, and so this is, I guess, it's given me insights into what that can look like, and that people can take serious issues seriously.
Obviously, some of the essential importance of your work is what it entails going forward in response. I'd like to take a hard question. And I don't want to put you in a position of speaking for all students, so it would just be for you three in your own perspectives here. I'm wondering how you as students relate to William Jewell due to what you have found in its history. How do you regard the college, and how has your attitude changed in light of what you've discovered of its history?
So I have a long background of history with Jewell. My grandpa is here today, was a Jewell alum, 20 plus relatives that went to Jewell. So I've always revered Jewell as this institute for higher education that focuses on critical thinking. And through this work, I have learned how to critically think about the college as a whole. And I think that's one thing that I'll really take away from my experience on the SMJP is that I learned these critical thinking skills through my other classes, through the CTI curriculum, and then I've been able to apply that to the college itself and its history. And so being able to think critically about the current narratives that we see about Dr. Jewell and about Donovan, and being able to change those based off of our research. So I guess I've always loved Jewell just because my family's always loved Jewell. And now I'm excited to be a part of this group that's really writing and rewriting the history of the college.
Well, on the inverse of Hayley, as someone who has been fairly a blank slate when it comes to the name William Jewell College up until my senior year of high school, I came into this institution with a general love for the people and the way that the administration and the academics is set up, but very little knowledge in regards to the history and how to address that history, in spite of the fact that I am a history major here at Jewell. So I would say the way that the Slavery Memory Justice Project or any action that's been taken over the course of the past year and a half, 2 years has changed my own perspective. It's really helped me to reflect on what we hold dear here in this community, and hoping and being optimistic that those goals that we set forward for ourselves are equal in the actions we do to address those goals. Critical thinking college, diversity, equality, inclusion, these narratives that we hold ourselves towards. I think that this group is a great representation of trying to attain the standards that the college sets for itself. I worry about looking at it in the sense of calling the thorn in someone else's eye when you not see the log in your own. I am optimistic that is not the case, that we do not try to fix things in others and in our students before we are willing to do so in ourselves. But I trust that organizations like this and the people in this room, other people on campus who are wanting to be engaged are fighting that negative response within me.
So if I remember, the question was sort of how has the research changed my perspective? Yeah. So I mean, studying and looking at the history of the college it felt like a puzzle piece, I guess, to not just a cultural issue, but of course a historical issue with the way that we understand sort of the way that we understand and honor the things that brought us to this point. And so I had already been, I guess, interested in campus, particularly related to how we have conversations of race, just because this is, when I got here, I was one of a literal handful of Black students who weren't athletes. And so that just caused me to, I think, naturally lean more into my studies and figuring out sort of how to do something intellectually rigorous in my time here. And so being able to kind of connect the pieces of how we have approached issues of race in the past and how we approach issues of race now, I think was the most enlightening thing. I hope my presentation was able to maybe start to draw some lines between the two, but that research is still, of course, not really complete, and it's going to continue to be developed. But there are a lot of insights, I think, about campus culture that we can take from the way that we deal with the present historical moment, and I didn't want to forget that. So the importance of that, I think, is the thing that I kind of discovered.
So do you see for the future?
So do you see for the future the possibility of having a course in slavery, memory, and justice at William Jewell College? The college has always had required courses for students, the Common Course, or 30 years ago, everybody had to take English 100. Everyone takes Gen 100, those courses. And so instead of having a course that would be on African American history, or a course in literature or whatever with this study, because we're looking now not at diversity with all other areas of this diversity, but looking at the history of slavery and justice here. That if students were involved in a course like this, they would have to look at the information that you shared today. That would be a very uncomfortable situation maybe, but is that some kind of, is that something that you might be recommending so that others, and then who would teach this course and who's going to write this history? Because the history that you're talking about has to be rewritten. I'm very familiar with the 2 or 3 statements that were made about Dr. Jewell, because I did do a study in 2000 on Dr. Jewell, and that only thing that I could find was in Hester's book on Jewell about the African Colonization Society, and that he freed his slaves. So that's kind of my question. Do you think?
Well, to start, there already is a wonderful course titled Slavery, Memory, and Justice that in some ways is working on opening up, I guess, that consciousness on campus. But on another level, I think that kind of academic study, that kind of course selection is crucial to having a history discipline at the institution. Reading sort of local instances as representations of the national story is very important, because it allows people to contextualize history in a way that is accessible to them. And so, there are various lines that I have drawn in my own research between the trends at Jewell and the trends that have occurred nationally. And so is Dr. Wilkins, as of the other presenters. And so this is, we don't want to fool ourselves into thinking that we're unique necessarily. We're incredibly non-unique, actually. And so I think that another realization orientation that the Smjp operates out of is this idea of creating accounts for history. There is you can write down a certain version of history, but it'll never be the objective truth. The objective truth is a ever slippery thing. So we are interested in providing an account of history from the student perspective. That's the orientation that we will stay in. But there are other accounts that may be valid. There are other ideas that we may not have considered. So leaving the conversation open to continue to develop is particularly crucial, and that can happen in ways like educational settings, like classrooms.
Yeah, I also want to just quickly add, my career goal is to be a history professor. So for any of you professors out there, if you would like to create a class like this, I would love to work with you. because I have done a lot of this research and am familiar with it, and it would help me for my future career. So just throwing that out there.
I have a question for Tavarus. On your second argument, themes of racial conversation, you claim that intentionality is a hall pass through history and a sleeping pill that ensures the dream. Well said. The intentions of the institution's focus are on upholding reputation and tradition and attending the needs of students. How is minimization a form of violence, and what is minimization? In other words, is Jewell violent by being complacent to its history?
In short, yes. Those were the wonderful words of Ta-Nehisi Coates, talking about intention as a hall pass through history. So a great way that I've distilled minimization, or concept of minimization in my thinking, is the act of tokenization, of how we use that as a reference point, right? Because you are minimizing or universalizing, as Ms. Fleming put it, the experiences of people of color through the act of tokenization, to say that this one person can represent the concerns or the issues that may be impacting a variety of students. So that is a way that I think of minimization, and to put it in a further context as a form of violence. When I mention, in addition to the physical impoverishments that slavery and a culture of avoiding racial conversations causes, it also causes social and psychological impoverishments. By that I mean is you start to, as a person who is given the identity category, given the token of Blackness, you start to reduce your own experience to think of it as representative of the whole. That is a form of violence, in my opinion, because it causes you to negate your own subject position. This is what I mean when I say subjective destitution. That is a theoretical term that comes from the writings of Frank Wilderson, if anybody is interested in that. But he talks about the social unthought, as he calls it, or the condition of Blackness. And so that's kind of the where I'm deriving, I guess, the association of violence to minimization. And that's the tokenization is the way that I sort of distill those ideas.
Fairmont, did you want to go next?
I don't think I'll use my thing. I want to say thank you to someone who doesn't look like most community around here. I want to thank each of you, even Dr. Robinson, for this information and giving a voice to the ancestors. I didn't know people who look like they were buried in the cemetery, right by the cemetery, like that. That really is sticking. So I want to thank you, each of you, for giving me a reason to go over there and acknowledge. Thank you.
My question was, are there any goals to push for administrative approval for the SMJP? Or if not, could you go into why the SMJP has not received the same approval as RRC?
I'll contest, I guess, your use of the word approval. The hope of the project is that the approval is on the shoulders of you all, the grassroots, not people who have certain positions of power at the institution. They, of course, are entitled to their own narrative. They're entitled to their own perspective, as are we. And so verification of our truth is not necessarily in our interest. But in terms of acknowledgement by the institution, we think that would be great, precisely because in all other historical instances of this kind of research, we don't see the sort of divide that we do here. And so mediating that may not only contribute to the discoveries of the investigation of slavery at Jewell, but it may also allow us to, figure out actual solutions to not only the issues with this history of slavery, but the present issues of perceived racial division on campus.
Only in one written account restricted within a slave person. You mentioned one in the first protocol. How many were there?
Yeah, so I believe it was after the Civil War. There was a big push across the nation to write down the narratives of enslaved people, and of the 200 published reports, one of them was John Anderson, who was enslaved by Ari McDaniel. The other 200 accounts are from slaves from across the nation. So that is the only book length account of a Jewell slave. We're still researching, and we're not going to stop researching until we can tell the stories of as many enslaved people as we can. But for right now, the one about John Anderson is, to my understanding, the only book length account of a Jewell slave that we have.
Go. We'll come back to you, sir, but please.
I'm a lifelong Missouri resident. I grew up halfway in Kansas City, halfway in St. Louis. The history, the racial slavery history in our state is messier, and in our geographic area in particular, dirtier, gnarlier, messier than just about anywhere else in the country. This is a general question for anybody that can get to it. There's a lot of history that is not known just about Kansas City. Bits and pieces, markers here or there. How do we get that history into the forefront of the conversation, not who's right, who's wrong, but more into getting the conversation moved forward, past the ugly history, past difficult conversations, past microaggressions. If you've got people in this room who are hopefully somewhere like-minded, how do we become leaders in this, in the community at large, to spread out from Jewell going forward?
Don't mind if I take this one. So one way is to do the kind of work that we've been doing at Jewell. We would like to see other colleges do this. WashU in slavery is doing great work. There's also been work done at St. Louis University, and there's potential for work to be in Kansas City. Okay, I'm working towards it. So Mizzou is also, there is interest at Mizzou, but shockingly, it hasn't really translated into the creation of a self-study on an institutional level. But I do have an idea for Kansas City. So I teach courses on World War II. Half of my class this semester has gone to the Auschwitz exhibit at Union Station, and I could not be more delighted about that. I think the next exhibit at Union Station should be on slavery in Missouri, slavery in Kansas City. Bring in some chapters. Bring in some narratives written by enslaved people. Bring in a hemp break. Let's have an exhibit on slavery in Missouri at Union Station. Union Station, call me. I think it's a great idea. There are others, but I think that kind of public representation of this history would be really helpful. Now, is that going to happen? Probably not. But in terms of what we can do as citizens, it is to talk to people. My explanation to the students of why we are doing this work, part of it is, if you convince one more person beyond yourself that the history of race and slavery in America matters, that it's important, that engaging with it will help you become a better citizen, that's victory. So everybody who leaves here today, who came in sort of skeptical or open-minded, but didn't really have the strong factual basis for explaining this history to other people, that's a victory. So just have conversations. If you're a journalist, write about it. If you're a future professor, write about it. You're doing all kinds of brilliant things, as these students will do, write and talk about it. And I'm going to write a book about this experience, and my mom will read it, and maybe a couple more people as well. But I think there's intellectual work to be done, and all of us can do that together. There's a collective intellectual enterprise in grassroots.